Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Shadow, and in this video, I'm going to be discussing the things that personal finance taught me about life. Number one is that everything in life has a cost. So I remember when I was in high school, it was during the COVID lockdown era of 2020. And at that time, the school system was rewired to be primarily online. So I remember I would have to take my Chromebook back home from school, and I'd be in the meeting lectures. And at the time, there was this new game that came out called Persona 5 Strikers. It's aged well now, but it was a shit to me back in the day. I remember I 100% that game. I beat it like 4 times or whatever. And I just had the time and the luxury to be able to play games like that. And I remember in my class, at the time, it was just a state of leniency to where I was able to afford to play games like that. And as a high schooler, and high schooler below, you don't really have responsibility like that. So you can afford to do things like play games and goof off, hang out with your friends all the time with very little consequence. When I grew up around my 18th birthday and just into my adult years to where I currently am, I realized that everything has a cost. Back when you're a child, you don't really have, the stakes aren't really that high. But when you're older, you realize that the same things that you used to do when you were younger, they don't really fly anymore because they have an inherent cost to it. When you're young, you don't really pay attention to your health that much. I remember when I was a kid, I would love to eat McDonald's. I would love to eat sugary stuff like donuts or whatever. And it didn't really harm me back then because I was young, and I didn't have any inherent health issues to where that become a problem. But when you start hitting your later 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, all that stuff starts to add up, and that's when your health begins to decline. If you eat like shit, for example, that has a cost because it may feel good in the moment, but the trade-off is that you're deteriorating your health. And while that might not really do much within 1 day or 2 days, in the span of several years, it can drastically damage your health and well-being. Negative things can compound. For example, wasting time, eating the wrong foods, not being in the gym, not socializing. All these things can compound into severely diminishing your well-being as well as your skills. But the opposite is also true when it comes to positive things. Even with positive things, there's still a cost. Like, for example, if you want a nice physique, that's going to cost you time, energy, discipline. There are days where I work out. I don't want to work out at all. I feel like shit that day. But I do it regardless because I know that the cost of the physique that I want and the health that I want is grit and discipline. Whereas if you skip that gym day or you decide to eat terribly, that's going to come back to haunt you in the sense that you might gain weight, you might develop cardiovascular issues in the future. And there's always a yin yang to it, like a positive cost and a negative cost. But no matter what, there is a cost to everything. If you doom scroll on social media, that costs you time, that costs you energy, that costs you dopamine, that costs you opportunity for something else. Like, for example, if you're wasting time, that's a potential day that you're not building skill, that you're not making money, that you're not improving yourself. And as I said, might not really do much in just a couple occurrences, but in the long terms of weeks, months, and years, that will bite you in the ass. I think one of the biggest reality checks that I experienced as an adult is, for me, I'm a very ambitious person. I have a lot of things that I want out of life. And when I was young, nobody was really there to teach me, like, hey, this is going to happen if you try and be better. So a lot of things hit me all at once. Like, for example, a cost that I experienced is that as I leveled up, I started to lose friends. I started to lose relationships. People that I thought would always be there for me. Like, I used to be, like in high school or whatever, I delusionally thought that my friends would stay with me forever. And then as I grew older and started to get more serious about life, I realized that I outgrew them. And then I lost those friends. I lost those relationships. And so that ended up costing me those friends as well as the pain that comes with, the loneliness of success. I'll make another video in the future where I discuss kind of what the costs of success are, but in the long term, it ended up costing me things to level up, like, friendships, people not liking me, people not understanding me, just a lot of things that you usually when you're in a comfort zone, you don't really expect that first. So you expect that you're always going to have that thing with you until you end up getting to a point where you don't need that thing anymore, and that thing is holding you back and hindering you. If you want that skill you want, or you want that income you want, or you want that job you want, anything that you want that lies on the other side of success is going to cost time, pain, grit. For me, I say one of my best skills out of my skill set is my art. That cost me back then when I was young. This was kind of a better trade-off. You know, the cost still exists when you're young. It's just you're not as conscious of it. It's not as high stakes as when you're adult. But back then, I sacrificed playing games and stuff, for example, and experiencing doing things that would give cheap dopamine to work on my art. And then my art skills compounded over years to get to the point where I think I could, with the right marketing and whatnot, I can go professional. And I also just have my own personal goals with art that I'll discuss in another video. But that cost me years and years of discipline and etiquette to get to where I'm at. The next part is a harsh reality, which is that working hard alone does not guarantee you financial success. You know, I've known people, I've seen people that have been stuck in the same job, like the regular 9-to-5 jobs that are minimum wage or barely above minimum wage. And as I've studied finance and I've seen the dynamic between the rich and the poor, what I've seen is that hard work does not equal you. When you work hard, that is not always proportional to what you'll get. Because, for example, the people that are at Walmart that do construction, that work in coal mines, they work hard. Like, there are people that take 2-3 jobs. They work hard as fuck. Like, they bust their ass all day, working like 40-50 hour work weeks, and they're still just barely meeting ends meet. What I also realized growing up is that society will teach you things like, oh yeah, go to school, work hard, get good grades, and then you'll get a good job and you'll be set. That couldn't be further from the truth in today's society. Now, that can apply for certain industries, like for example, the healthcare industry. That's something that's always going to be in demand, and that's an industry that's a lot harder to replace. But in just comparison to how it was now versus back then, a lot of people that think like that have a very old-fashioned way of thinking, to where going to college back then was almost a guarantee that you would get a job. But it's not quite the same now, because you can go to college, get in tens of thousands of dollars of debt, and still not have a job. And then you kind of just waste all those years doing something that someone else told you to do. But what I learned from that, especially reading books about finance and just understanding the mindset of the rich, is that working smart is very important. Because hard is good. Of course, I'm not saying don't work hard at all, but just working hard alone is not going to cut it. You have, like I said before, you have to incorporate the yin and the yang. You need to work smart, like learn the right skills, learn the niche skills. Don't just do something that everybody is doing. You need to set yourself apart from your potential competition, because what school teaches you is to do the same thing as everyone else, and then that creates a heavily inflated market of workers. But what you need to do is you need to go and build skills that are in demand, that less people have, and that can make you stand out and just expand your skill set to where it will make you harder to replace. That directly ties into my third point, which is that people will work for money their whole lives and still never be rewarded, and still struggle in life. This ties into my fourth point, which the second, third, and fourth point all tie into each other, which the fourth point is that the modern socioeconomic state is designed to keep you as a slave. You see, back then slavery was very apparent, because if you were labeled a slave, you would understand that you're a slave. You would be bought, you would be working in the fields all day, and you wouldn't be paid for it. But it was established that you were a slave. But nowadays, you work hard, get paid just enough to barely survive, and all the money that you received, majority of the time for the lower class and the middle class, you're giving that money up in the form of, expenses, taxes. So you're not really moving forward. And you might ask, well, Shadow, that's a normal thing. That's just how working works. But honestly, I beg to differ, because the people that understand the long-term socioeconomic game understand that there are different things that are designed to stop you from climbing the corporate ladder. And the more aware that you become of these hidden, aspects that aren't really spoke about, especially in schools, the quicker you can escape from it. There's a term for this in the personal finance book Rich Dad Poor Dad, which is called the rat race, which is essentially the modern day struggle of just working a job to barely meet ends meet, and then staying stuck in that aspect of working for money. But as I learned more about finance, I discovered that the way to achieve true success is to not work for money, but to have money work for you. And that can involve investments, whether that's into yourself or through something like stocks and bonds, and combining different types of income instead of just relying solely on your work income. Because if you get fired, you're kind of screwed in that case if you're just relying on that income alone. And number 5 ties into the other one, which all these are related in some shape or form, but this one kind of talks about what we just discussed. But the rich work smarter, not harder. Of course, there are rich people that work hard. Like starting a business, that's not easy, especially scaling a successful business. That can take 50-hour work weeks. But what the rich do that makes them stand apart is that they work smart and they're very deliberate with the things that they do. And something that I learned that stuck with me in the book Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki is the fact that there was this part in the book that emphasized, don't say, I can't afford it. Say, how can I afford it? And you might ask, like, well, sometimes you can't fully afford something, which is a legitimate concern. But what that mindset does is it reshapes the way that you think about finance. And then it also forces you to think. Because I remember when I was little, there would be things that were too expensive for me. I'd be like, dang, well, I just can't get that thing. Whereas now I have the mentality of, how can I afford it? And that forces you to think, and it forces you to take creative action. Like, for example, that would mean sacrificing something else that was on your shopping list for something more important. That can mean looking for coupons, looking for discounts, doing something to drop the price, even taking a payment plan. Like, for example, I had to pay for college for the duration of this year. And if I didn't have that mentality of how can I afford it, I would not be able to go to college this year. So what I did was that I took a payment plan and I paid month by month until I could afford it, with just my current expenses and my situation. And I was able to get it done with minimal losses. So if you want to be financially literate and successful with handling money, you need to always be able to think. Not just give up on things because it seems like it's impossible or it's too expensive in this case. 5th and final point is that companies value what you can provide as opposed to just you as an individual. And what I mean by this is that a job is essentially a contract between you, the employee, and the employer, stating that in exchange for the value and the skills that you provide them, they will reward you in compensation opportunities. However, with how many competition there are in job markets, it's extremely important to distinguish yourself as a person of value with a unique skill set that is exceptional above your competition, to make sure that you stand out and that it's much harder to easily replace you. Because the more powerful your skill set is, the more difficult it will be to replace you. And having personal attachments to a company can be to your detriment if you don't understand that your skill set will always come first. I've seen people that have stuck with the same company for decades, and I'm quite sure that the primary reason is because of the fact that they've built a personal attachment to that company, and they think that the company values them far more than they actually do in reality, which is keeping them stuck and preventing them from being able to jump up in the corporate ladder or pursue another career or job in that same market for higher advancement opportunities. So if you can understand this and have a level of detachment when it comes to jobs, it'll do much better for you in the long run, because you'll prioritize yourself and what you can provide a company, and know that at the end of the day, you are just a number, but you can use that as a form of liberation to understand that
you have to always be improving yourself, and that if you don't get complacent in that same position, you have a lot of opportunities when it comes to promotions as well as just higher pay and benefits.